What's up, Dreamhive community? Welcome back to Art by Galen. My name's Galen, and today I'm going to show you how to draw this. This is going to be the beginning of a new series that I'm working on called Draw With Me, where I take simple objects, or not so simple objects sometimes, and I draw them step by step with you. You can follow along with me whether you're working digitally, whether you're working traditionally, doesn't matter. I will occasionally show some tricks that you can use when you're doing digital art, because that's how I'm going to be doing the majority of these. Today we're going to be working on drawing a spellbook. We're going to work on drawing the rough sketch and cleaning it up and getting it ready for colors, which we'll do in another video. But for now, let's hop into Photoshop. That's what I'm using, or whatever other medium you might be working in, and let's get started. So I have an image that I'm using as my background. This is just like kind of an old paper sort of texture that I made. I will put a link in the description where you can download this for yourself if you would like to. It doesn't matter, it's just something I like to have on here. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to lock this layer. That way I don't accidentally draw on it. I'm going to make a new layer, and I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. And I'm going to get a brush tool. I will also include a link to where you can download my pencil brush that I use. However, it's not necessary to do this. It's there are a lot of amazing brushes out there, but if you want to use the stuff that I'm using, there will be links that provide where you can get it. So if we picture a book in our minds, you know, it seems very simple. One of the things about simple things in art is they can be deceptive. We see them in our minds and we think, okay, it's very easy, but it's not always super easy to do. Before we get started, I'm going to show you one trick that you digital artists can take advantage of, or not if you want to challenge yourself, but this is one trick you can do. You can start off by giving yourself the face of your book, and this is handy because it allows you to use you know, the symmetry tools and things like that. If you want to design like what the cover of your book is going to look like if you're going to have little corner bits or something like this, if you're going to have a title on it, maybe an image or something like that. So then you can go into transform, which is Control T in Photoshop. Otherwise it would be edit and free transform. Once we've got it selected to transform, we can put it into many different ways of distorting it, and you can actually, you know, put it into perspective from your sketch instead of having to guess, because it's not always super easy to get it exact. However, this is a trick that only you digital artists will be able to take advantage of. When I'm going through the steps, I will draw it without using this method. So where we need to start is we need to break it into a basic shape. Now, books are already fairly basic in shape. They are essentially just a rectangle, sometimes square. Like if we have a rectangle like so, that it would simulate the face of our book. And in order to give it depth, we would give it lines from the edges coming down, and then draw parallel lines to our edges that are showing. And that gives us a basic block to start with. And we don't necessarily need it to be very detailed at this point. We're just kind of sketching and roughing out the shape. You can follow along and try to create the one that I'm making here, or you can try to draw them at different angles if you would like. I recommend doing a few of these. They're pretty fun. They're more fun than they sound like they are, especially with some of the stuff we're going to be doing today. So I'm going to enlarge this a little bit. The next thing that we need to do, because books don't, like the pages don't often just come all the way out to the edge, unless you're looking at like a modern paperback novel or something like that. But what we're looking for is more of a, like kind of a classic sort of role-playing fantasy spellbook sort of vibe. So we're looking at like a big, thick, leather-bound book, maybe even with a lock on it, maybe with some sort of magical engraving or something in the leather. But in those types of books, the pages are never going to come all the way out to the edge right here. So what we need to do is we need to erase this edge out and sketch it just a little bit further back. And we'll erase this one out and do the same thing just a little bit further in. And then inside where the cover and the pages would meet, we'll give ourselves another sort of parallel line coming up. And that'll be the edges of where, like our, you know, these would be our pages, and this here would be the book cover. Pretty simple. And we'll do the same thing over here. If you're using Photoshop, I don't know how the tools work in other software, but in Photoshop, if you're using a brush tool, you can tap, hold shift, and tap again, and it will give you a straight line from where you last were to where you are. So that's one neat little shortcut that you can use. And now we need to draw in the top of the edge of the book cover here. I'm actually going to bring these pages up just a little bit farther because I want the book cover itself to seem a little bit thicker. And as I said, I'm going to try to sketch this out mostly without using any of the digital tricks. That way anyone who is drawing traditionally or doesn't have those tools in their software can follow along pretty easily. And just so I can see where we're coming from, I'm going to make a copy of this, and I'm going to take this other one and I'm going to shrink it down and bring it over here so we can see where our first step was. Like we drew the shape and then we chiseled out the area where the pages are. Next, I want to decide where my leather strap and lock are going to go. I want the strap to go horizontally across the book, so I'm going to make it as parallel as I can, and I'm rotating the canvas to give myself a better wrist movement with this. That way I don't have to have an awkward position with my hand while I'm drawing this. And I'm trying to make it roughly in the center of the book, and just giving myself some guidelines there, and then now I'll rotate it back. I think that looks pretty good. It's a little bit off on this top edge, but I can fix that. You know, that's part of art, is we're gonna make mistakes. It's never ever gonna come out just perfect. If it does, you are very, very lucky. And but don't ever be afraid of making mistakes. That's a really big thing with art, because if making mistakes is difficult for you, you're going to have a hard time. So what I'm going to do, I'm very lightly kind of erasing away parts of the section of the book here where I think the straps are going to overlap. And I want it to come down about here. It's going to come down around the sides, like so. And it's got some thickness to it, so I want to keep that in mind when I draw the edge, like, because I don't want it to just stop at the edge of where the book binding is. I want it to go around it. Same thing back here. Instead of stopping here, we want it to actually come up above it. And then I want to make a section somewhere in here where we have a sort of locking mechanism or something like that. I'm going to make like an actual, like this section here will be metal, and there will be a little keyhole because, you know, if you're a wizard and you've got a book full of spell books, or because if you're a wizard and you've got a book full of, you know, dangerous spells, you want to keep them safe. And not something that just anybody could unlock. I'm making changes to this here to make it a little bit more fitting with the edges. And I think the keyhole will go right about here. And I'm just going to do kind of a generic keyhole style. And the same thing, thinking about the thickness of the leather, because it's not flat like paper. It has, you know, some big thickness to it. So we can go along this bottom edge, because we would see that edge of the leather, and just draw in that secondary line that will give us that layer of thickness to it that we want. And we can do the same thing with our lock. Now, our lock would probably go around the leather, so it might be a little bit thicker than the leather itself would be. And I'm pretty happy with the placement of that. So that's where we're going to keep that. And now I can erase these lines out. The next step I think we're going to do is, I like the idea that we talked about earlier of doing some little corner protectors for the book. A lot of times they would, you know, add little metal bits and things like that to the corners of a book in order to protect the corners from getting damaged as they're handled and as they're stored. And you know, a book of spells seems like something you would want to protect. So I'm not going to completely erase out those corner lines because I want to use those to establish some of our, you know, thickness for this metal corner. And I'm going to try to draw roughly about the same shape up here on the top. Give myself about where it would start. And I'm keeping it pretty simple because I don't want to overdo it with the details. And then we'll do the bottom edge here. And do a couple of rivets because that's how they would have you know, connected these metal pieces. And then we'll give ourselves a couple of little indications of the same sort of corner protection on the bottom as well. All right, so now we've got a pretty good start. The next step, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this layer and I'm going to do the same thing that we did earlier. I'm going to make a copy of it and I'm going to shrink it down and put it up here so we see our steps. Now I'm going to take this layer here that we've got. I'm going to reduce the opacity on it. If you're digital, you can do this. If you're drawing on paper, keep your initial sketches light, or you can kind of dab it with an eraser or just very lightly erase on it. What I like to do is turn the opacity down and then make a new layer where I can draw on top of it, but make it a little bit cleaner. And maybe even start adding some details to it. Now, when I'm cleaning up a drawing, the things that I'm thinking about are making it look less rough. That's the whole idea of cleaning it up. You want it to look sharper, crisper, more close to the finished drawing that we're going to do. And so what I'm just going to do is start gradually, like, laying in what would be the line work for this. Another way that you can do this instead of lowering the opacity on the layer is just choose a darker color and draw on top of it. That works just as well. Now on the back of the binding here, instead of being just a straight edge, I'm going to give it a little bit of a curve. I'm going to give it a little bit of a curve and I'm going to give it a little bit of thickness just like we did the leather piece here, because we're going to add that same thickness to the book binding itself. I'm going to rotate my canvas around. I'm going to draw that bottom line of the front cover. Then I'm going to draw the top line. And that top line doesn't have to be a solid one, it just needs to be an edge, something that indicates that there is a corner there. And we're going to do the same thing for the rest of it. Now I'm going to go into time lapse while we finish this up. Okay, so let me show you what I've done here. I'm going to turn off the original sketch layer so you can see that we've got a much cleaner version of our sketch. Some of the little things that I've done is I have added the indication of thickness on the book cover itself, both on the top, the bottom, and the side back here. Up here where the corner of the pages stops, instead of making it a straight line, I've made it kind of a jagged line. And what that does is gives the impression that it's not a smooth edge. Being handmade paper or something like that, or being an old book, the pages are going to be staggered and maybe not the same size or shape, and that gives a little bit of impression of that. I've also added a slight little indentation right here, and the reason for that is instead of just a corner or even a rounded corner, if I do this and I give myself a little dip there, I'm exaggerating this, but that gives you that impression of where the book would bend before getting to the spine. So we would actually have a little bit of a line going back here. And you can put that in here or not. We can save it later for shading if we want to. It's completely fine either way. I want to make another copy of this, that way I can see our step one more time. And if we look at these two side by side, they look pretty similar, but you can tell the one on the right is definitely sharper and cleaner. So now that we've got our cleaner outline, the next thing that I want to do is establish where the lighting is coming from. And just to keep it simple, we're going to imagine that the light is directly above the book, like maybe even off to a slight side, but nothing super fancy. And we'll just keep it a general single light source. So if it's above the book, I want to look for the darker places first. So I know that here, like in between the pages and the binding is going to be the darkest. So I'll go ahead and just kind of fill that in. I know that there will be a little bit of a shadow under the belt, like where the strap is here. And you know, if you're working digitally or traditionally, you can do this as long as you're using a tablet or a screen that has pressure sensitivity. You can start with a darker color and you can ease it into a lighter blend just by easing your pressure that you're putting on your pen or your pencil. I also want to give the indication of some pages, and we don't want to do every single one because that makes it look really kind of cluttered in my opinion. It's not really necessary. And just give a few lines that are mostly parallel with the direction that the pages would be going. And you can do some from the front and from the back, like from each side, and some in between if you want. I like to do this, like I said, it gives it that kind of old and sort of tattered feel, like it's an older book, or you know, the pages have been flipped through many times. Something else that I like to do that I think is kind of fun is somewhere I'll pick a page where like the page might be sticking out a little bit, like maybe part of it's torn, or maybe there's like a note tucked in it or something like that, just to add a little bit of flavor to it. Now the next thing that I want to do, I'm thinking about our lock, and I want our lock to have a section, because right now it looks like just one solid piece. I want it to have a part that will disconnect when the person unlocks it. So I'm just going to draw a little line here. And that gives us the impression that there are two pieces of metal instead of one. And that whenever the person does unlock it, this piece over here will separate and come out. I think I'm going to add a slight shadow to the edge of the binding, because it's not being in direct light. The light would be above, so it would make sense that these would be a little darker. And I'm just going to do that all the way around. Do the same thing with our strap here. And again, I'm just trying to work, I know I'm working digitally, but I'm going to try to work where basically it's the same way that I would do it if I was drawing with a pencil on paper. Now I want to do some shading here in this little divot. Like I want it to look like somebody took, like if you took a bit of clay and pushed your finger into it and then just made a line down the side of something. That's sort of kind of concave. So like if you were looking at it from the side, the binding would be here and the edge would dip down just a little bit like so. Like not with a hard edge or anything, not like this. So we don't need super hard edge shading, but we can achieve this still by doing some hatching and cross hatching. Or you can go for smoother shades if that's your thing. Either way is fine here. Also, if you are drawing along with this and making your own fancy little spell book, what I would love is if you post that anywhere on social media, please be sure to tag me. I am Art by Galen on Instagram and Twitter. You can also join our Gilded community. We have galleries there where you can jump in and share your artwork with us, and we can all talk creative things and talk about other things as well. There's sections for gaming, there's sections for, you know, posting pictures of your dogs and cats if you want to. There's all sorts of stuff like that. And it's an amazing community filled with a lot of really great people. Now this lower section of the book cover, I'm going to go over one more time, a little bit lighter, but I'm overlapping both this section and the edge, which makes them both darker. And that allows me to add some tone to the top of it while still keeping the edge a little bit darker than the top. To give the implication that these are made of metal, I'm going to use some really blocky kind of areas, and we're going to make it a shiny metal. I don't know what kind of metal yet, but we're going to make it shiny. And then I'm going to take some lines and take that. So what I'm doing here is we're basically giving a sort of really made up reflection of the room around. Like if you ever look at a piece of chrome or a piece of polished metal, you'll see what I'm talking about. There's always a really dark band kind of around where the horizon would be if you're looking at it straight on. And but this is what we're going to do. We'll decide what color the metal is going to be when we do the coloring video. And we'll do kind of the same thing here, just a little division where there's some shines and shadows going across these pieces. But just for now, something to give it the impression that it's shiny. And now the only thing left would be if you want to give a little bit of shading to the pages, and I would keep this pretty light, like because we want the pages to still look lighter than the rest of everything. But if we make it darker than everything, it may not look proper. And I'm keeping it pretty rough and loose here. We're still technically sketching, but we're doing more of a refined sketch, I suppose. I'm going to come in and do a little bit of hatching on the leather now, where I think the shadows and little bends and things might be. The lower edge is obviously going to be a little bit darker than the rest of it. And I'm trying not to do any cross hatching on the face of the leather, other than in this shadow up here. And I'm mainly doing that so I don't make it too dark. And I don't want to clutter up the entire drawing with a ton of hatching lines. And something that you may want to do is just blend it smooth and give it some tone that way, and we can do that as well. One way that I like to do it digitally is I take a softer brush. Unfortunately, those working traditional, you'll just have to take the time and blend this out with your pencils. But digitally, you can just brush in a nice soft tone of where you want it to be. And I'm just going to go over everywhere that the leather is. And you might wonder, Galen, what the heck are you doing right now? But I will show you. Now I'm going to get my eraser, and I'm going to use the same pencil brush that I was using to draw with, but we're going to erase with it now. I'm going to erase it off of the pages. I'm going to erase it off of the outside of the book, obviously, because we don't need it out there. And then, as you may have guessed, I'm going to erase it off of the metallic parts. And the rest of the pages over here that I missed. And what this should do is make those metallic parts look even more shiny. Now you could call it finished here, or what you can do is you can make another layer and you can come in with yet another darker color and really start to refine the edges of the illustration. And that's up to you. So here we can see our steps from just the basic shape of the book, starting to add the details, refining the details, and then adding details and shading. And I want to take a moment to say thank you for being here. Thank you for watching this video. I appreciate it very much. And be sure to tune in next time if you want to learn how to turn your sketch of your spellbook into this. I'll see you next time.